She had 30 seconds to make a choice: hide the girl or confront the men already inside the penthouse. The 6-year-old daughter of a sole mafia boss was her only charge. The father was away. The front door was breached, and the black maid from Lagos, in her pale blue uniform, stood between the child and everything in the dark hallway. Her name was Amara. She was 28, a contract caregiver from Nigeria, and her entire future in Korea depended on staying invisible. But in the silence of that hallway, with a child's hand clutching her apron, invisibility was a luxury she could no longer afford. This is the story of how a maid, trained for care, became a fortress, and how the most vulnerable person in the room transformed a luxury penthouse into a deadly trap for the men who entered it. 4 months earlier, Amara Nwachukwu arrived at Incheon Airport with a single suitcase and an employment contract stamped E9-2, a non-professional caregiver visa. It was valid for 1 year, tied to a single employer, and could be voided with one phone call. Her recruiter had been clear: keep your head down, do your job, do not get involved. The employer was Kang Junho. Public records listed him as the CEO of Kangwon Export Group, a legitimate textiles firm. Less public were the whispers in certain Seoul precincts, the rumors of a parallel business in underground lending and protection, a legacy from a father who had built an empire on the border between commerce and coercion. Junho lived in a penthouse atop the Star River complex in Gangnam. The apartment took up the entire 61st floor. 3,000 square feet of bulletproof glass, Italian marble, and a silent alarm system wired directly to a private security firm. Amara's interview was conducted by the head housekeeper, Mrs. Choi. The woman was polite, precise, and her eyes held the constant, weary calculation of someone managing a household that was also a fortress. The job was simple on paper: care for Junho's 6-year-old daughter Sumin. The mother was out of the picture. The specifics were not provided. Amara's shift was from 4 in the afternoon until 8 the next morning, 5 days a week. She would have a small room off the service corridor. Sumin is quiet, Mrs. Choi said. She has nightmares. Your duty is to ensure she is safe, fed, and asleep. You are not a playmate, you are a guardian. The first time Amara saw the child, she understood the unspoken part of the job. Sumin was a tiny thing, drowning in a pink pajama set, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit. Her eyes were old. They were the eyes of a child who had learned that loud noises weren't always fireworks, and that daddy's late nights meant she should hide in her closet with a book. She didn't speak to Amara for the first 3 days. Amara didn't force it. She had grown up in Lagos, the oldest of 5. She knew the language of scared children. It was in the silence. It was in the way they watched doorways. Her own childhood had been punctuated by the sudden, violent electricity of area boys fighting outside their compound. Her instinct then, as now, was to create a pocket of calm. She made simple meals. She laid out crayons without demanding they be used. She read aloud from a Korean storybook, her accent clumsy, and sometimes, just sometimes, Sumin would silently point to a word she mispronounced. The bond, when it came, arrived through a shared secret. It was the 2nd week. Sumin had a nightmare, a truly terrible one. She didn't scream. She froze, trembling so violently her teeth chattered. Amara didn't turn on the bright lights. She sat on the edge of the bed and began to hum a song her own mother used to sing, a Yoruba lullaby about the moon watching over the lagoon. The vibration of it, the unfamiliar, melodic sounds, seemed to cut through the child's panic. Sumin's breathing slowed. She reached out and grabbed a fistful of Amara's sleeve. The next morning, Sumin spoke, a single word: again. From then on, the lullaby was their ritual. It was also their first line of defense. It was a signal that meant, I am here, you are safe. Amara began to learn the rhythms of the penthouse. Junho was an absent silhouette. He left before dawn, returned late, his movements preceded by a low buzz of tension that made the staff stiffen. He was not cruel to his daughter, but he was a stranger, a giant who would pat her head and study her as if trying to decipher a complex report. The real education came from Mrs. Choi, one tense evening when Junho was out on what was called business. The older woman, perhaps seeing Amara's genuine care for the child, broke protocol. Over a bitter cup of tea in the staff kitchen, she laid out the unseen architecture of their lives. This home has 2 fronts, Mrs. Choi said, her voice low. The one you see and the one you must never acknowledge. Mr. Kang's business, it creates admirers, and it creates enemies. The security system is not for show, you must know the protocols. She showed Amara the silent panic buttons embedded under the kitchen island, in the main hall console, and beside Sumin's bed. She explained the safe room. It wasn't a bedroom. It was a reinforced closet in Junho's private study, lined with Kevlar, with its own independent air supply, a landline, and a separate cellular repeater. The door was a slab of steel disguised as a walnut bookshelf. Its code was changed monthly. If the alarm sounds, or if I call you and say the words Blue Garden, you take Sumin, you run to that room, you lock the door. You do not open it for anyone except Mr. Kang, me, or the police whose badge number you will verify through the view screen. You do not hesitate. Do you understand? Amara understood. She was being trained not just as a caregiver, but as the last line of defense for 1,000,000,001 heiress in a world where kidnappings were not just movie plots. Her visa, her salary, her future, all depended on her ability to perform this dual role perfectly: visible nurturer, invisible guardian. For 3 months the routine held. The lullabies, the crayon drawings that began to include 2 stick figures, a tall one and a small one, the careful navigation of Junho's stormy presence. Amara mapped the penthouse not as a home, but as a battlefield. She noted which floorboards creaked. She identified the blind spots in the camera coverage, a sliver of the service hallway, a corner of the kitchen pantry. She mentally catalogued potential weapons: the heavy marble bookend in the study, the sharp professional chef's knives locked in a drawer, the fire extinguisher at the end of the hall. The turning point came on a Tuesday in late November. Junho returned home unusually early, his face a mask of controlled fury. He went straight to his study. Minutes later, raised voices filtered through the door. A man was shouting. Then, a sound Amara knew from Lagos, the sickening crunch of a fist meeting flesh, a body hitting the floor. Silence. Then Junho emerged alone. His knuckles were raw. He looked at Amara, who was frozen in the hallway with Sumin's dinner tray. His gaze wasn't apologetic. It was assessing. Take Sumin to her room. Stay there. Mrs. Choi will handle the mess. That night Sumin's nightmare returned. The lullaby wasn't enough. The child whispered, "Is the bad man gone?" Amara had no answer, but she knew then that the fragile piece of the penthouse was an illusion. The violence wasn't outside the walls. It had been invited in. And as she held the trembling girl, a cold certainty took root. The protocols were for a threat from the outside. What happened tonight proved the threat could come from within. The safe room code, the panic buttons, they were part of a system Junho controlled. What if the system itself was compromised? 2 days later, Junho left for a meeting in Busan. He would be gone for 36 hours. Keep the routine, he told Amara, his hand on the elevator button. The security team is on alert. But as the elevator doors closed, Amara saw it, a flicker in his eyes that wasn't command. It was something closer to doubt. The first alarm, a soft chirp from the panel in the kitchen, sounded at 9:17 that night. It wasn't the full siren. It was a perimeter breach warning, the service entrance. Amara's blood went cold. Mrs. Choi was out for the evening. The security team's status screen on the wall flashed green. They should have been responding, but the intercom remained dead silent. From down the hall, she heard Sumin's door open. A small, scared voice called, "Amara." The control panel chirped again. A second breach, the main foyer. They were already inside. The system had been bypassed. The security team wasn't coming. Every protocol, every promise of safety evaporated in that instant. Amara had 30 seconds. The safe room was across the penthouse, past the main living area. The men were between her and the only official sanctuary. To run for, it was to run into the dark. She looked at Sumin, standing in her doorway, the stuffed rabbit held in a death grip. She looked at the dark more of the hallway leading to the living room, where a shadow just moved. She made her choice. She did not run for the safe room. Instead, she took Sumin's hand and pulled her back into her bedroom. She closed the door, but she did not lock it. Locking it would tell them exactly where they were. She put a finger to her lips, her eyes holding Sumin's. The child, reading a terror deeper than any nightmare, didn't make a sound. From the living room, a voice, low and guttural, spoke in Korean. "Find the girl. He said she'd be here. The fortress had been breached, and the maid, with no weapons and no way out, was about to turn the entire penthouse against the men hunting them. The bedroom door was a flimsy barrier. Amara knew it would hold for seconds, not minutes. The voice from the living room was moving, searching. She had to break the script. The men expected a fleeing maid, a terrified child, a scramble for the panic room. She would give them none of it. Her eyes scanned Sumin's room. Pink walls, a dollhouse, a bookshelf. Then she saw it, the air vent high on the wall, a relic from an older renovation. It was large enough for a small child. She lifted Sumin, her finger back over her own lips. The child's eyes were wide pools of terror, but she nodded, a tiny, fierce understanding passing between them. Quiet as a mouse, Amara whispered in English, a phrase from a storybook. Hide and do not come out, no matter what you hear. She helped Sumin wriggle into the duct, the stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. The vent cover slid back into place with a soft click. The hiding spot was cold, dark, and claustrophobic. It was perfect. Now Amara was alone, and she had to make them believe the child was with her. She grabbed Sumin's duvet, bundled it into a lump, and scooped it into her arms like a sleeping form. She then did the last thing a fleeing person would do. She didn't run for the exit. She moved deeper into the penthouse, toward the master suite, toward Kang Junho's private domain. She heard the bedroom door handle rattle behind her. A kick. The wood splintered. She didn't look back. She slipped into Junho's study, the room where the business had been concluded days before. The heavy scent of cigar smoke and expensive leather hung in the air. The safe room door was there, a seamless part of the bookshelf. She ignored it. Instead, she went to the massive teak desk. Her hand went underneath, finding the small magnetic keybox Mrs. Choi had shown her once, in case of an emergency where Junho was incapacitated. Inside was a single keycard and a thin, black remote fob. The fob controlled the penthouse's privacy mode, a feature designed not for defense, but for discretion. It would kill all internal cameras, mute the external microphones, and most critically, it would electronically deadbolt every primary door in the apartment, including the main entrance. It was meant to lock the world out during sensitive meetings. Tonight, Amara would use it to lock the threat in. She heard heavy footsteps in the corridor. Time was up. She slapped the fob. A deep, resonant asterisk thunk echoed through the penthouse as 12 solid steel bolts shot home. The men were now locked inside with her. The panic buttons were useless. The security team, if they were even watching, would see a system-wide lockdown initiated from the master study, a signal that Junho himself was handling a threat. A voice, angry and confused, shouted from the hallway, "The doors, what did you do?" Amara pocketed the keycard. It was the only thing that could reopen the main exit. She left the bundled duvet on Junho's desk, a decay, and slipped out through the study's second door, which led to a private terrace access corridor. She moved in utter silence, her bare feet on the cool marble. Her heart was a drum against her ribs, but her mind was frighteningly clear. She was no longer a maid in a hostile country. She was a woman in her grandmother's compound in Lagos, navigating a power outage during a riot, using every shadow, every remembered creak in the floor. The two intruders were methodical. One, a bulky man with a shaved head, checked the safe room door, pushing against it uselessly. The other, leaner, with a scar tracing his jaw, swept his flashlight through the study. He found the bundled duvet. He kicked it. Realization dawned on his face. She's playing with us. The kid isn't here. They regrouped in the main living area, their voices low and tense. Amara listened from behind a service panel in the hallway she had loosened weeks ago out of sheer boredom. He said the maid was a nobody, a timid thing, Scar said. "This is not timid," Bulky replied. "She just locked us in a cage. Find her. She has the keycard, and she knows where the girl is." Their search became more violent. They overturned furniture, slashed cushions. They were looking for a person, but Amara was making herself a part of the house itself. She used the narrow service passages meant for staff, passages that didn't appear on any architectural schematic given to security. She emerged in the main kitchen. Her goal wasn't just to hide, it was to control the environment. She remembered the gas lines. The kitchen had a professional-grade range with separate feeds. She turned every knob to the on position. The hiss of escaping natural gas was barely audible, but it began to fill the space with the rotten egg smell of added mercaptan. She didn't light it. She created a bomb and left the fuse unlit. Next, the lights. The smart home system was complex, but its weakness was the manual override panel in the utility closet. She opened it and began flipping breakers, not all at once. That would be suspicious. She killed the lights in the living room first, plunging the men into darkness. Then the hallway lights, then the study. "She's in the walls," Bulky shouted, his voice tinged with a new frustration. They were armed, powerful men, being toyed with by an unseen woman in the dark. The psychological shift was immediate. They were no longer hunters, they were becoming prey in an unfamiliar forest. Amara's next move was the audio system. She accessed the whole house controls from a tablet left charging in the pantry. She selected a track, not music. It was a recording of a barking dog, a fierce Doberman from a security sound library. She piped it into the darkened living room speakers at full volume. The sudden, aggressive barking erupted from multiple points, disorienting, sounding like a pack was loose in the room. The men scrambled. A gunshot rang out, deafening in the enclosed space, shattering a vase. They were shooting at shadows and speakers. From her hiding spot, Amara saw her opening. The bulky man was momentarily separated, checking the terrace door. The scarred man was near the kitchen entrance, his back to her. The cloud of gas was thickening. Amara needed a distraction, a finale to her chaos. She took a ceramic mug from a shelf, aimed for the far end of the kitchen, and threw it. It smashed against the stainless steel refrigerator with a spectacular crash. Scar turned, rushing toward the sound, into the kitchen. Amara, from her position, saw him flick on a flashlight. The beam swept across the gas range. In that instant, she acted. She had grabbed the fire starter from beside the stove, a long, wand-like device. She sparked it. The tiny flame at its tip was harmless, but as she thrust it into the cloud of gas near the range, the world turned white and orange. The asterisk woof of ignition wasn't an explosion, but a flash fire. A wall of flame roared across the kitchen ceiling, swallowing the escaping gas. It singed the man's hair and jacket, throwing him back with a yell of pain and shock. The automatic fire suppression system triggered. Water rained down from ceiling sprinklers, drenching everything, shorting out electronics, and filling the penthouse with a blaring, piercing fire alarm. In the chaotic downpour, with the man stunned and his partner shouting, Amara moved. She wasn't running away. She was running toward. She slipped past the dazed, burning man, out of the kitchen, and into the now flooded main hallway. Her target was the bulky man, who was frantically trying to pry open the deadbolted front door. He heard her and turned, raising his gun, but the floor was slick. Amara didn't stop. She dropped into a slide, like a baseball player, shooting across the wet marble directly into his legs. He crashed down hard, his head snapping back against the doorframe. The gun skittered away. Amara was on her feet in an instant. She didn't go for the gun. She went for the keycard in her pocket. She swiped it through the reader beside the door. The bolts retracted with a heavy clank. She yanked the door open. But she didn't flee. She stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the emergency lights from the corridor outside, water from the sprinklers plastering her uniform to her skin. She looked at the two men, one burned and coughing in a flooded kitchen, the other groaning on the floor. She had won. She had protected the child. She could run. Then she heard it, a small muffled sob, from the air duct in Sumin's room. The fire alarm, a sound she hadn't accounted for, was too much. Sumin was crying, and the scarred man in the kitchen, his ears trained for such sounds, stopped his cursing. He looked up, his burned face twisting into a grimace of triumph. He had heard it too. He shouted to his dazed partner on the floor, "The vent! The child's in the vent!" Amara's victory evaporated. She had cleared the path to escape, but she could not take it. To flee now would lead them straight to Sumin. She had locked them in, turned the apartment into a trap, and now she had to stay in it with them. She stepped back inside, letting the heavy front door swing shut behind her. The bolts, sensing the closed door, did not re-engage. The exit was open, but Amara was not leaving. She stood between the injured wolves and the hidden pup, the water raining down on her. The scarred man was already stumbling towards Sumin's room, a knife now in his hand. Amara had no weapons left, no tricks. All she had was a body they would have to go through. She picked up the fallen gun from the wet floor. It was heavy, cold, alien in her hand. She had never held one before. She pointed it with trembling arms at the scarred man blocking the hallway. "Stop," she said, her voice barely a whisper, then stronger. "Stop." He paused, gauging her. He saw the terror in her eyes, the clumsy way she held the weapon. He smiled, a horrible sight on his burned face. "You don't have the guts, maid." He took another step. Amara's finger tightened on the trigger, but before she could fire, a new sound cut through the alarm. A different siren, not the fire alarm. The building's security siren. Blue and red lights flashed, reflecting through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Police cars, not private security. Actual Seoul Metropolitan Police in numbers were downstairs. The scarred man's smile vanished. The game had changed again. They were out of time. He looked from Amara to the door, then back towards Sumin's room. Calculation flickered in his eyes. The mission had failed. Now it was about survival. He made his choice. He turned and ran, not for the child, but for the open front door, grabbing his bulky partner and hauling him up. They stumbled out into the corridor, fleeing toward the service stairs. Amara stood frozen, the gun still pointed at the empty space where they had been. The penthouse was a wrecked, flooded, smoking shell. The alarms wailed, and from the wall, a small, scared voice called, "Amara." She dropped the gun as if it were white-hot. She ran to the vent, her fingers fumbling with the cover. She pulled out a sobbing, shivering Sumin and clutched her tightly, rocking her. "It's over, little one, it's over." But as she held the child, looking at the open doorway through which the men had escaped, she knew it wasn't true. They had gotten away. They had seen her face. They knew her name was on a contract in this apartment, and they would tell whoever sent them that a maid had undone everything. The police would arrive any second. She was an undocumented migrant worker who had just illegally possessed a firearm, caused significant property damage, and been at the center of a violent home invasion. Kang Junho's world was one of private solutions and silent payoffs. Where would his protection lie? With the maid who saved his daughter, or with the need to bury a scandal that threatened his entire operation? The water from the sprinklers soaked them both, feeling less like a relief and more like a chilling rain. The real danger, Amara realized, wasn't the men who had left. It was the man who was coming home. The first police officer through the door didn't see a heroic guardian. He saw a foreign woman, soaking wet, holding a traumatized child in the wreckage of a billionaire's home, with a discarded firearm on the floor beside her. His hand went to his own weapon. "Do not move, put the child down and step away." Amara obeyed, her movements slow, placing Sumin gently on a dry patch of carpet. The little girl immediately began to wail, reaching back for her. "Amara, don't go." But Amara was already being pushed against the wall, searched, handcuffed. The narrative was writing itself before she could speak a word. She was detained in the kitchen, away from Sumin, who was wrapped in a blanket and whisked away by a female officer. Amara watched her go, a cold dread settling deeper than any fear of the intruders. The detective in charge was Inspector Park, a man with the weary eyes of someone who policed Gangnam's wealthy. He surveyed the flooded, scorched penthouse, the splintered door, the bullet hole in the vase. He listened to Amara's halting statement, translated by a young officer. She told the truth: the breach, the lockdown, hiding the child, the fire, the men fleeing. Inspector Park took notes, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he asked a single question. "The firearm, where did you get it?" "It fell from one of the men. I picked it up to scare him." "You have experience with guns?" "No. Yet you knew how to operate the deadbolt override, the gas lines. This is sophisticated for a caregiver." Amara said nothing. To explain was to implicate Mrs. Choi and reveal Junho's paranoid security protocols. Silence felt like her only shield. The forensics team arrived. They bagged the gun. They took photos of the burned kitchen, the footprints in the water. They found the keycard in Amara's pocket. The story, from their perspective, was a puzzle with too many pieces that fit a different picture, an inside job a domestic worker with unusual knowledge, a staged break-in gone wrong. Then Kang Jun-ho arrived. He came not with a lawyer, but with two of his own men, clean-cut, silent, standing apart from the police. He took in the devastation, his jaw tight. He went straight to Inspector Park. Their conversation was low, intense. Amara saw money and power whispering to authority. She braced for the betrayal. He would call her unstable. He would cite visa violations. He would hand her over to bury the incident. Jun-ho finished talking with the inspector. Then he walked over to where Amara sat, handcuffed on a stool. He looked down at her, his face a storm. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he said, "Where is my daughter?" "With the officer. She is safe. She is not hurt." He nodded once, then he did something astonishing. He turned to Inspector Park. "Uncuff her." "Mr. Kang, procedure." "She saved my daughter's life. She is not a suspect. She is a witness, and she is under my protection. Uncuff her." The authority in his voice was absolute, forged in boardrooms and backrooms alike. The inspector hesitated, then nodded to an officer. The cuffs came off. Amara rubbed her wrists, stunned. Jun-ho led her to his study, which was less damaged. He closed the door, leaving his two men outside. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquor, handed one to Amara. Her hand shook so badly the liquid sloshed. He downed his in one gulp. "Tell me everything," he said. "Not the police version, the real version." So she did. She told him about Sumin's vent, the privacy lockdown, the gas, the fire, the gun. She told him about the men's voices, their specific goal, find the girl. When she finished, Jun-ho's eyes were dark with a fury colder than any she had seen before. "They were not here for money," he said, almost to himself. "They were here for her, a kidnapping or worse." He looked at Amara. "You understood that. You didn't just hide, you attacked. Why?" The question hung in the air. Amara thought of her grandmother, of her siblings in Lagos, of the quiet child who had learned to trust her. "Because she asked me to stay," she said simply. Jun-ho absorbed this. The human answer in the inhuman world he inhabited. He made a decision. "You will not speak to the police again without my lawyer present. The story will be simple, a home invasion. You followed security protocols. The men fled. The rest is chaos. You do not mention the lockdown fob. You do not mention the gas. The gun was theirs. You never touched it. Do you understand?" Amara nodded. She was being given a script, a lifeline, but it came with a chain. Her protection was now entirely dependent on his will. The next 24 hours were a blur of controlled containment. Jun-ho's lawyers descended. The police investigation was suddenly streamlined, its scope narrowed. The incident was officially classified as an attempted burglary that escalated. No mention of targeted kidnapping. The media was fed a bland statement about a faulty alarm and a minor kitchen fire. Kangwon Export Group stock dipped insignificantly. Amara was moved to a suite in a discreet hotel guarded by one of Jun-ho's men. Mrs. Choi visited, her usual composure shattered. "You did what none of us could have," she said, gripping Amara's hand. "He sees it." But the real war was happening in the shadows. Jun-ho was not a man who accepted an attack on his child. He turned his own formidable resources inward to find the source of the breach. His investigation focused on 2 points: how the security system was bypassed and how the men knew he would be away. The answer to the first came quickly. The building's head of security, a man who had worked for Jun-ho for 5 years, had a sudden family emergency and resigned, leaving for Jeju Island. He was never seen again. The message was clear. The betrayal had been inside the perimeter. The second answer was more devastating. Jun-ho's trip to Busan had been to finalize a merger with a shipping consortium, a deal that would push a rival syndicate, led by a man known as the Eel, out of a lucrative port route. The meeting was secret, known only to Jun-ho's inner circle, his lawyer, his CFO, and his consigliere, a man named Seo. Jun-ho summoned Seo to the damaged penthouse. Amara was brought back too, under the pretext of comforting Sumin, who refused to sleep without her. She was in the child's room, now repaired and cleaned, when she heard the raised voices from the study. She couldn't help but listen, the door slightly ajar. "You told me the meeting was secure," Jun-ho roared. It was Junho SSI. I vetted everyone myself, CO pleaded. Then how did the eel know to strike asterisk that night? How did he know to target my asterisk daughter asterisk? A terrible silence followed, then CO's voice, low and broken. There is one other person who knew your schedule, who always knows. Another silence, longer, heavier. No, Junho said, the word a whisper of pure denial. Her mother, CO said. Amara felt the floor drop away. Sumin's mother, the woman who was out of the picture, not dead, not absent, an active player. Junho's wife, Yujin, had left him 3 years prior, after his world consumed their marriage. She had signed away custody for a staggering settlement and vanished into Europe. But the rivalry with the eel was older than their divorce. The eel had been Yujin's childhood friend, a man she had allegedly appealed to for protection during the bitter divorce proceedings. Junho had dismissed it as emotional manipulation. Now, it appeared to be a strategic alliance. The kidnapping wasn't just business, it was a message from his ex-wife, I can take what you love most. Junho erupted. The sound of crashing furniture echoed through the penthouse. Amara held a sleeping Sumin tighter. The child's own mother had orchestrated this terror. The revelation reframed everything. The intruders weren't just thugs, they were weapons in a deeply personal, venomous war. When Junho emerged, his knuckles were bloody again, his tie askew. His eyes found Amara in the doorway. In them, she saw a humiliation deeper than anger. His failure had been familial, not just professional. He had been outmaneuvered by the ghost of his own past. You heard, he stated. Yes. Then you understand, this does not end with police reports. This ends when one of us is in the ground. He walked to the window, looking down at the glittering city. You have a choice, Amara. You can take the money I will give you and a new identity and go somewhere far away. You will be safe, or you can stay because she will try again. And if you stay, you are not just a caregiver anymore. You are a soldier in a war you did not choose, and I cannot promise you will survive it. He was offering her an out, a clean, quiet, safe exit. All she had to do was abandon the little girl sleeping in her arms, the girl whose mother had just signed her death warrant. Amara thought of her visa, her family's hopes pinned on her success. She thought of the cold hotel room, the guarded door. She thought of the gun in her hand, the fire on the ceiling, the fierce, terrifying certainty of purpose she had felt in the flood. For the first time in her life, she had not been invisible, she had been a force. She looked at Junho, not as her employer, but as a flawed, dangerous man standing alone against a tide of his own making. I made a promise to her, Amara said, nodding at Sumin. I stay. A grim respect flickered in Junho's eyes. Then we remodel, he said, starting tomorrow. The next phase began not with a bang, but with a blueprint. Junho's security architect arrived. The penthouse would not just be repaired, it would be re-engineered. And Amara, to her shock, was consulted. They asked her about skylines, about choke points, about the maid's passages. Her experience of the attack was treated as tactical data. She was trained, not in firearms, but in situational awareness, in emergency first aid for trauma, in basic defensive techniques. Mrs. Choi taught her how to detect surveillance devices. She was given a new, encrypted phone linked directly to Junho and his most trusted lieutenant. She was being hardened into a formal part of his security apparatus. Her uniform remained, but her role had fundamentally transformed. She was the permanent, living guardian embedded in the heart of the fortress. Weeks passed, the new security was invisible but omnipresent. Sumin, in therapy, began to smile again, but the shadow was in her eyes. The bond between her and Amara was now ironclad, a silent pact forged in a vent during a firestorm. Then the message arrived, not to Junho, to Amara. It came on her new phone, an unknown number, a single photograph. It was grainy, taken from a distance. It showed her leaving the hotel weeks earlier, holding Sumin's hand. The text beneath was in English. Even heroes can have accidents. Send the girl to her mother, or you will drown in the Han River. They had found her, the eel or Yujin or both. They weren't threatening Junho. They were threatening her asterisk, the weakest link, the immigrant worker with everything to lose. They were offering her a deal: betray the child or be erased. Amara stared at the photo. The safe, clean exit was gone. The war had just marched up to her doorstep and pointed a finger directly at her chest. She had 30 seconds to make another choice: show the message to Junho and become a permanent target in his war, or handle it herself and risk everything. She picked up the phone. Her hand was steady. She knew what her grandmother would say: when a snake shows you its fangs, you do not show it your back. She dialed, not Junho. She dialed Inspector Park. "Inspector," she said, her voice calm, "I need to report a threat, and I have evidence. I think you will find the sender very interesting." She was no longer just hiding or defending. She was taking the fight to them, and she was doing it not from the shadows of Junho's world, but in the glaring light of the law. The game had just changed again. Inspector Park listened in silence as Amara laid out the entire story, from the whispered threat in the hallway to the text message on her phone, a story that contradicted the official report his own department had filed. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. "You are telling me this was a targeted kidnapping attempt, orchestrated by the child's mother, using a known organized crime figure, and my superiors were persuaded to look the other way?" "Yes," Amara said. "And you have evidence beyond your word." She slid her phone across the table. The threatening text, the photograph: "The number is untraceable, but the photo was taken from the building across from the Hotel Schiller. Your forensics team found the bypass on the security system. The man who did it has vanished. These are not coincidences, they are a trail." Park was a good policeman trapped in a city where justice was often a private transaction. But Amara's evidence, combined with the nagging irregularities of the initial investigation, presented him with a choice: be complicit in a cover-up or seize a case that could burnish his career or end it. He chose the case. "You will have protection, and you will testify if it comes to that." Amara's decision to go to the police created an earthquake in Kang Junho's world. When he learned, his anger was volcanic. He confronted her in the penthouse, now fully restored and upgraded. "You went outside. You brought the law into my house." "Your law was not protecting her," Amara replied, standing her ground. "Only containing the problem. The law can put them in a cage. You would only put them in the ground. Which one lasts longer?" It was the first time anyone had questioned his methodology to his face and framed it as a strategic, rather than moral, failure. He saw in her not disobedience, but a different kind of strength, one that operated in the light. He relented, grudgingly. His lawyers would coordinate with the prosecutor's office. His resources would fuel the official investigation. The war would now be fought on two fronts: in the courtrooms and in the back alleys. The police moved quickly, leveraging Junho's covert intelligence. The eel was arrested on unrelated financial charges, a temporary hold that gave them time to pressure his organization. Facing a long sentence, one of his lieutenants cut a deal. He gave up Eugene. The testimony was damning. She had provided the schedule, the security bypass codes purchased from the corrupted head of security, and the specific demand: take the girl alive and bring her to a private airfield. A warrant was issued for Eugene's arrest for conspiracy to commit kidnapping. She was detained in Nice, fighting extradition. The public scandal erupted. The elegant, exiled socialite was front-page news, her picture alongside the eel's mugshot. The narrative of a bitter mother trying to steal her child back was quickly buried under the colder truth. She had hired violent criminals to do it. Through it all, Amara was the silent, steady center for Sumin. She explained in gentle terms that her mother was sick and had done a very bad thing, and that she was not coming back. The child, in the resilient way of children, absorbed this. Her world had shrunk to a simple equation: Amara was safety, everything else was noise. The legal proceedings took months. Amara testified via video link, shielded from the media. Her account was factual, precise, and devastating. The prosecution won. Eugene was extradited and sentenced to 12 years in a Korean prison. The eel received 20. Their syndicate crumbled, its pieces absorbed by rivals, including, discreetly, by Kang Junho's operations. The threat was neutralized permanently. In the aftermath, Amara expected to be dismissed. Her visa was nearing its end. She had served her purpose. She began to pack her small room. Junho summoned her to his study. On his desk were two folders. The first, he said, tapping it, contains a financial settlement, 500,000 US dollars, a new passport, a plane ticket to anywhere you wish, a clean, quiet thank you. You can go home to Nigeria, a wealthy woman. You have earned it. Amara's heart sank. This was the expected end, the payoff, the silent goodbye. He opened the second folder. This one is a contract, a 5-year employment contract with Kangwon Export Group. The title is Executive Director of Domestic Security and Child Welfare. It comes with a salary that is not as large as the settlement, but it is substantial. A sponsored E7 visa, renewable. An apartment, not in this building, but in a secure complex we own. And guaranteed, paid tuition at any university in Korea for any degree you choose to pursue. He slid both folders toward her. The first option is gratitude. The second is a future, but it is a future here, tied to my world, a world that will always have shadows. Choose. Amara looked from one folder to the other. One was an ending. The other was a terrifying, open-ended beginning. She thought of Sumin, who had just started drawing pictures with 3 stick figures, a big one, a small one, and a medium-sized one in a blue dress. She thought of Mrs. Choi, who had become a friend. She thought of the city itself, which had tried to break her and instead had shown her who she was. She pushed the first folder back toward him. She picked up the pen and signed the contract in the second. Junho allowed himself a small, rare smile. Good. Then he added, the job has one non-negotiable condition. Every Tuesday night, you have dinner here with me and with my daughter. We will order jollof rice from that Nigerian restaurant in Itaewon you like, and you will teach me how to argue about books. It wasn't a request. It was an invitation into the fragile, guarded inner circle of his life. Amara's new life was a carefully constructed paradox. Officially, she was a mid-level corporate employee. In reality, she was the chief architect of personal security for Kang Junho's most precious asset, his daughter. She designed protocols, vetting procedures for staff, and safe routes to school. She took psychology courses online, learning about childhood trauma. She was, in every sense, Sumin's guardian. The final surprise came a year later. Inspector Park, now promoted for his role in breaking the kidnapping ring, visited her new apartment. He brought a file. A formality, he said, but you should see it. It was her immigration file. Stamped across it were the words "Permanent Residency Application Approved." The grounds were listed as special contribution to public safety. It was a rare designation, almost never given. Inspector Park had nominated her. The prosecutor had supported it. Kang Junho's lawyers had quietly ensured there was no opposition. She was no longer a temporary worker on a leash. She was a permanent resident of the Republic of Korea. She could not be deported. She could not be easily silenced. She belonged. That Tuesday, as they sat around the penthouse dining table with containers of jollof rice, Sumin, now 7, looked at her father and then at Amara. "Is Amara my sister now?" she asked. Junho choked on his water. Amara laughed. Junho recovered, looking at the two of them, the daughter he was learning to love openly and the woman who had taught him what protection really meant. "No," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "Not a sister." He paused, finding the word. "She is family." The penthouse was still a fortress. The windows were still bulletproof. The safe room was still there. But the fear that once lived in its walls had been replaced by something else. It had been replaced by the sound of a child's laughter, by the smell of West African spices on a Tuesday night, by the quiet, certain knowledge that the strongest defenses are not made of steel and code, but of loyalty and choice. Amara Nwachukwu came to Seoul with one suitcase and a work visa. She took a job caring for a silent little girl. She learned the blueprints of a fortress, and when the darkness came, she did not hide in the safe room. She turned the entire house into a weapon. She didn't just save a life, she rebuilt one, and in doing so, she built a new one for herself. Some people wait their whole lives for a chance to be brave. Amara's bravery was in the 30 seconds she chose to stop being invisible, and in the years that followed, she never was again. The story of Amara and Sumin is more than a thriller. It is a map of the invisible geography that exists in the shadows of our cities. A geography where the most vulnerable and the most powerful live side by side, separated by marble floors and bulletproof glass, yet connected by the fragile, essential threads of human need. We design fortresses to keep danger out, but true safety is not a function of walls. It is a function of people. It is the choice to stand between a threat and a child, regardless of uniform, passport, or protocol. In a world that often asks caretakers, nannies, and domestic workers to be silent and unseen, Amara's story asks a different question. What happens when we see them? When we recognize that the person cooking the meals, braiding the hair, and singing the lullabies might also be the person who redesigns the entire battlefield in 30 seconds. The penthouse in Gangnam still stands. Its security is now legendary in certain circles, but its real secret isn't in its technology. Its secret is in the Tuesday night dinners, in the jollof rice ordered from Itaewon, in the little girl who now laughs freely, and the man who is learning, slowly, how to be a father instead of just a protector, and in the woman from Lagos who looked into the dark and did not blink. Her story forces us to reconsider where we place value. It asks us to look at the people in the background of our own lives and wonder what strength, what history, what incredible reflex lies hidden beneath a uniform or a job title. The most formidable guardian is not always the one with the gun. Sometimes, it is the one with the gentle hands who knows exactly when to stop being gentle. Amara's journey from a temporary visa to a permanent home is a rare victory in a system not designed for such endings. It is a testament to the fact that sometimes courage does get recognized, that loyalty can build a bridge across canyons of power and prejudice, and that family can be a thing you choose and fight for every single day. So the next time you walk past a high-rise, a mansion, a gated community, remember, the strongest thing inside might not be the safe room. It might be the quiet woman with the watchful eyes who knows every creak in the floor and who has already decided what she will do when the darkness comes. She is the human firewall, and her story is everywhere, waiting to be told. If you found this story of hidden strength and impossible choice compelling, there are countless more narratives like it, written in the quiet corners of the world. For deeper dives into the true stories behind the headlines, subscribe. Until next time.